That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, obviously the draft has shaken a lot up. I mean, we got Watson to Green Bay, Skye Moore to Kansas City. We have to update these rookie wide receiver rankings. I'm going to be excited to do so. But before we dive into it, please make sure you drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and I have a massive announcement for everybody who has pre-ordered their Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide. That draft guide will either be sent to you tonight or tomorrow morning. I'm very, very excited to get those out. Just waiting on the editor to get it back over to me. And if you have not gotten your Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide yet, make sure you go do so. Go over to flockfantasy.com, and when you purchase your Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide, please make sure you use promo code NFL Draft to get a discount. NFL Draft for the discount on flockfantasy.com. Well over 100 pages of more research than you could possibly handle. But that should be it. Let's go ahead and let's begin ranking these wide receivers. And I will give my rankings, and I will also give a prediction who I think is going to go off the board in your Dynasty Rookie Draft. And let's start it off with Drake London. Now, Drake London's my wide receiver one. Now, I had it that way before the NFL draft, and I honestly thought that he was going to go behind Garrett Wilson. I thought he was going to go behind Jameson Williams. I thought there was a small chance he went behind Chris Olave, because we've seen that the NFL will value speed over and over and over again. And I was looking at Drake London saying, okay, well, he won't have the speed to stretch NFL defenses, but he'll have the production profile that we know he's going to command volume at the NFL level. Well, for Atlanta to go out there and tell us they're not worried about it and to take him as the top wide receiver off the board, I'm very excited about it. And I will admit, it is a horrendous landing spot. The Atlanta Falcons, it's a bad landing spot for a multitude of reasons. A, they don't have a quarterback. Yeah, they got Marcus Mariota. Yeah, they took Desmond Ridder. If you look historically where Desmond Ridder was drafted in the NFL draft, Desmond Ridder has almost no shot at all. Like, I am not holding any hope out for Desmond Ridder. So it's going to be an ugly situation right away. However, this is an Atlanta Falcons team that I honestly think is going to be bad enough to be at the top of the 2023 draft. Now, one thing that we have to figure out is what's going to be the situation with Calvin Ridley. Because we know that Calvin Ridley, he was saying he wanted out of Atlanta before the suspension. And I think based on the suspension, based on the entire sentiment around the situation, I am going to be expecting that Calvin Ridley does return in 2023, but it won't be to the Atlanta Falcons. Now, if Calvin Ridley were to go back to the Falcons, of course this situation gets even worse, because even if they were able to go out there and draft Bryce Young, even if they were able to go draft CJ Stroud in next year's NFL draft to fix the quarterback situation, if Calvin Ridley comes in and all of a sudden Drake London is competing for targets with Calvin Ridley and Kyle Pitts, it's going to be an ugly situation. But I'm looking at this profile, I'm in love. Like, if we put Drake London into our wide receiver prospect model, of course, all of this is in that Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide. I mean, there's over 100 pages. There's going to be everything in there, but you will see that wide receivers that scored next to Drake London scored a 40 in our wide receiver prospect model. T. Higgins scored a 39, the only wide receiver to score 39 since 2014. And outside of that, Justin Jefferson at 40. Jamar Chase, 41. Amari Cooper, 42. Sammy Watkins, 42. Calvin Ridley, 42. There are no busts on this list. And the wide receiver position is different than running back. Where we know at running back, you go in the top 10 in the NFL draft, you're pretty much guaranteed to hit just because your coaching staff's going to force feed you volume. We know at wide receiver that these players that get drafted highly in the NFL draft, they can easily bust. But I don't think that's Drake London. Because with London, not only does he have the draft capital of being the 8th overall selection, but he dominated at USC. We've talked about this over and over and over again. He had Michael Pittman Jr. He had Amon-Ra St. Brown there when Drake London was 18 years old. Michael Pittman was a senior. Drake London got on the field. Drake London produced almost 600 receiving yards through 8 games played at 18 years old with those other wide receivers. That is fantastic. Fantastic. And this past year in 2021, he goes out there and in 8 games, he posts almost 1,100 receiving yards. He's a massive wide receiver. No reason to assume that he's not going to have an elite touchdown upside as well. I do really like the comparison to Mike Evans. Not necessarily because I just see that he's a big-bodied wide receiver, but because his one weakness is I'm not expecting Drake London to be able to rack up a ton of yards after the catch. That will be one concern that I have. And I will also say that it's hard to say Drake London is the same level draft prospect as a Justin Jefferson, as a T. Higgins, as a Jamar Chase, because the sample sizes we're looking at are very small. So we adjust everything to per game. And not only do we adjust it to per game, we also adjust it to market share numbers as well. And we're looking at a wide receiver that played a total of 22 games in college. So while those comparisons look fantastic, I do want to put a small asterisk in saying that we have to just acknowledge the fact that it is going to be a smaller sample size. That's why I don't think he's as good of a prospect as someone like Justin Jefferson was, but I still think he is very, very exciting. And now, I lied to you. There was one other wide receiver in our wide receiver prospect model that scored a 40. That was right there with those other options. That was Garrett Wilson. Now, Garrett Wilson also lands in a bad situation. I would say if you are of the opinion Calvin Ridley comes back in 2023, I would draft Garrett Wilson as the wide receiver 1. If you think Calvin Ridley is going to be on a different NFL team in 2023, then I think you go Drake London. But with Garrett Wilson, we pull up that 2020 season. Almost 35% of the receiving yards on a per game basis went in his direction with Chris Olave, with Jackson Smith and Jigba, and also Jameson Williams, all in the same team. Now, a big thing that we cover in our Dynasty research book is how to adjust your market share numbers when you have other top NFL talent, NFL caliber talent at the wide receiver position. And just to be very simple about this, it makes Garrett Wilson an elite prospect that he was able to dominate with elite wide receivers on his roster. If he dominated elite level wide receivers, he's an elite level wide receiver himself. Now, very similar to Drake London. I have to acknowledge that I don't think he's the same level of prospect as Justin Jefferson was. I don't think he's the same level of prospect as the T. Higgins. And the reason for this is we're using his 2020 season for our wide receiver prospect model. Only 8 games played. So yet again, another small sample. It's just what we have to deal with. I still think we have to rank him this highly. Now, I am not in love with Zach Wilson. I honestly don't think this is that great of a landing spot. The Jets killed this draft. The Jets probably had the best draft of any team this season, but I'm still looking at this roster saying it's going to be hard for them to get it done with Zach Wilson at quarterback. I'm assuming that at this point, Zach Wilson is on that Carson Wentz trajectory without that peak MVP type level season. I think you're most likely hoping that Zach Wilson turns into a slightly above average NFL starter, but still, you are looking at this as an offense that will slide Elijah Moore over to the slot, and there are a lot of snaps available on the outside. We've learned our lessons. We're not going to be overdrafting receivers. We're not going to be pushing players too far down at the receiver position in particular based on landing spot. I'm going to stick with our 2 elite level prospects, stick with London, stick with Wilson at 1-2. Treylon Burks will be our 3rd wide receiver. Now, I would imagine that the majority of people watching this video are going to have Treylon Burks at wide receiver 1 because undoubtedly out of all the first round wide receivers, Treylon Burks gets the best landing spot. Now, of course, we're not expecting Tennessee to have a ton of passing volume to go around, but you really only have Robert Woods to compete for targets with. And this isn't prime Robert Woods. This is Robert Woods coming off of a torn ACL that was near the end of last season. And we know that it's much harder to recover when you shorten the rehab period, as well as when that player is older, like Robert Woods. So you could see Treylon Burks go there and immediately insert himself as a wide receiver 1 in Tennessee. Now, I'm not going to lie. We had this written before the NFL draft in this Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide. Our comparison for Treylon Burks is A.J. Brown. Treylon Burks scores a 36 in our wide receiver prospect model alongside A.J. Brown, Brandon Cooks, and you do have bust in this range. You do have someone like Bryan Edwards in this range. But you look at the frame, you look at the way they play, it is similar. Now, what I will say is, please do not think that Treylon Burks is as talented as A.J. Brown. Just because they compare to each other as prospects, just because they're stepping into the same role, you cannot assume that they are going to have the same level of production. Please just think about this logically. If Treylon Burks was as talented as A.J. Brown, because I've had people arguing with me about this, if that was the case, would the Philadelphia Eagles have traded that pick to Tennessee for A.J. Brown just to pay A.J. Brown $100 million compared to having Treylon Burks on a rookie deal? I don't think so. Like I said, I'm no rocket scientist. I am not a genius here. But if you could have the same player and instead of paying him $100 million, he's on a rookie deal, you're probably taking the player on the rookie deal. So please don't assume that Treylon Burks is going to step into this role and excel just like A.J. Brown did. I think people are pushing him up to that wide receiver 1 spot just because it's easy to see, how he operates in this offense and how he would find success. I think it's just a little tough to do when we have those elite level prospects with London and Wilson. But now let's go over to our next player. This is going to be a tier down. We're going with our wide receiver 4. Literally, our rankings have not changed at all up until this point. We're going Chris Olave. With Chris Olave, this is a wide receiver that checked every single box coming in. This is a wide receiver that dominated in 2020 alongside Garrett Wilson with other elite level wide receiver prospects on that same roster. Now, the difference between Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson and why Garrett Wilson is a better prospect is Chris Olave stayed an extra year at Ohio State. Not only did he stay an extra year at Ohio State, but he was also disappointing that season. He fell to being the wide receiver 3 on that offense, but it was probably one of the best wide receiver cores of all time for college football. Probably right there behind 2019 Alabama. So I'm willing to almost just overlook the senior season. Now, of course, in our prospect model, we have to give him a knock for staying all 4 years. Historically speaking, that's not a good sign, but now he's going over to New Orleans. We've had conversations. We've heard chatter that Michael Thomas maybe is on his way out. It would make sense. This team is in cap hell. And if that's going to be the case, all of a sudden, Chris Olave could potentially turn into Chris Godwin from 2019 with Jameis Winston. The season where you add Godwin as the wide receiver 2 in fantasy. What you need to see from this landing spot is you need to see Jameis Winston turn back into that DGAF quarterback. You need to see the coaching staff, now that Sean Payton's gone, just say, hey, you know what, Jameis Winston, you do you go out there, you sling the ball around the field. I don't care. Turn the ball over. We need to rack up some yards. If that were to be the case, I think you could be very, very excited about Olave, but this is more so just another bet on talent. It's a bet on talent over situation, very similar to what we're making with Drake London as well as Garrett Wilson. But now moving to our next wide receiver, the perfect example of going with talent over situation. We're going Jameson Williams as our wide receiver 5 here. Now going to the Detroit Lions, it's a horrendous landing spot. And what's funny, and I know I look like a hypocrite while we say this, is Jameson Williams actually scores lower in our wide receiver prospect model compared to someone like Skye Moore, who obviously lands at a much better spot. But this is why you can't just play fantasy football through spreadsheets. 99% of our analysis will be derived from numbers, so I can prove it to you instead of just going, oh yeah, he looks good on the TV. Trust me. No, I have to prove everything that I say. And with Jameson Williams, it's hard to prove that with our wide receiver prospect model where he scores a 32. That's going to be lower than Skye Moore. But the reason he scores this low is he simply did not break out until his junior season. He was not able to get on the field as a freshman and a sophomore at Ohio State and produce at all. Now, the reason we're overlooking this score, and you're already screaming about it in the comment section, is because the wide receiver core he was a part of. We talked about this over and over and over again. Y'all know I had Chris Olave ranked over Jameson Williams all offseason, and it's because that 2020 season where Chris Olave, he dominated over Jameson Williams. I think you have to have Olave over Williams. But we can't just say, okay, well, Jameson Williams isn't better than Garrett Wilson. He's not better than Chris Olave. That means he's a bum. No, you can't say that at all, especially when he goes over to Alabama and he finds a ton of success. Now, what I will say is I think that success at Alabama was overstated based on the school he was playing at because he only had 31% of the team's receiving production on a per game basis. Not much more than someone like John Mechie, but it's all about the context. He was that first year transfer. It was his first year in that system. He stepped in and he was the wide receiver 1 immediately. So for these reasons, I'm willing to overlook some of the numbers with Jameson Williams. You hate the situation in Detroit, but I do think he's a much better talent than Skye Moore. I think he's a much better talent than Christian Watson. So we're going to ignore the situation. We're going to go Jameson Williams. And now this is where we can get into landing spot. This is where we can say, you know what? Skye Moore maybe is the best wide receiver in our prospect model from here, but we're going Christian Watson. The reason for this is Christian Watson finds the best landing spot in this year's NFL draft. He's going to the Green Bay Packers. You got Sammy Watkins. You have Alan Lazard there as the wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2. You have nobody in Green Bay to catch the ball from Aaron Rodgers. And with Christian Watson, very similar to Jameson Williams. You go over to our wide receiver prospect model. He doesn't score as highly as someone like Skye Moore, but it's because there's one red flag that we can excuse away. I need to be completely transparent. I need to let you know when we're excusing red flags away so you can determine for yourself if it's a valid excuse. And I think it is. With Christian Watson, he stayed all 4 years at North Dakota State, but it's because his junior year got pushed to playing in the spring. He had to play spring ball because of COVID in 2020. He wasn't at a major conference. He wasn't at Ohio State. He wasn't at Alabama. So if you're trying to use this as an excuse, we've said this so many times before, but if you're trying to use that 2020 COVID season as an excuse why James Cook, why Zamir White, why Chris Olave stayed an extra season, it's just an excuse. That doesn't really hold any weight at all, but with Christian Watson, it does. So I'm willing to overlook that. I'm willing to look at the fact that he's a freak in terms of his size-adjusted athleticism. I'm willing to look at the fact that he dominated production his final season there at North Dakota State. I'm willing to look at the fact that he broke out as a sophomore as well, and he's stepping into the best situation a wide receiver could ask for. We're going Christian Watson as our next guy. And now after this, we are going to have Skye Moore, someone we've continuously talked about checking every single box. You have Juju Smith-Schuster on a 1-year deal in Kansas City. You have Marquez Valdes-Scantling going to play a ton of snaps, but you want Marquez Valdes-Scantling on the field. Marquez Valdes-Scantling's not a wide receiver you're worried about. He's the guy operating deep downfield. He's the guy increasing the efficiency of the offense without drawing too much volume. So Skye Moore is going to be the X wide receiver here. He checks every box. We've already apologized for getting him wrong at the beginning of the offseason when I try to come out here and I try to tell you that this was a player that we should not rank over Wan'Dale Robinson, that we should be looking at him in the same tier as Wan'Dale Robinson, David Bell, and Justin Ross, which obviously looks horrendous now, but we fixed that about a month ago. And with Skye Moore, if you plug him in our wide receiver prospect model, he checks every freaking box. Now that he gets the draft capital where he's a round 2 selection in the NFL draft, I'm not worried whatsoever about him being a round 2 selection. You get great wide receivers from round 2 every single season. Sign me up for Skye Moore as the next option. And now our last guy we're probably going to talk about in this video will be Jahan Dotson. With Jahan Dotson goes pick 16 to Washington. It's just a significantly worse situation. And this is different with the wide receiver position compared to running back. Running back draft capital means so much because draft capital is so strongly correlated with the opportunity you should get at the next level, what their coaching staff thinks of you, and how many touches you'll be getting per game. Wide receiver, yeah, that draft capital, you'll get on the field, you'll play snaps, but it's going to be up to you to create separation. It's going to be up to you to actually go out there and win and score fantasy points. Where at running back, you can just fall into fantasy points, no problem. Skye Moore, he'll be able to get on the field in Washington. It's just a much worse situation than what we are going to have with a Christian Watson, with a Skye Moore. And at the same time, if you head over to our wide receiver prospect model, because Jahan Dotson stayed all 4 years at Penn State, because Jahan Dotson didn't break out until his sophomore, junior year, dependent on how you cut it, he was already ranked in the same tier as a Christian Watson, as a Skye Moore. We had these players all next to each other. So when we had them next to each other going into the NFL draft, and then Christian Watson lands with an Aaron Rodgers, Skye Moore lands with the Patrick Mahomes, that's when I'm willing to say, you know what? We're going with the landing spot. We're taking the landing spot. We're pushing these players up. We're pushing this player down. I don't want to be overreacting and all of a sudden drafting Christian Watson or Skye Moore over Jameson Williams. I feel like that may be a little bit aggressive. I could understand why you did it. If you wanted to go out there and draft Christian Watson over Jameson Williams, I can understand it. I may even do it in a league or two if I find that that's going to be the only way I can get Christian Watson in a dynasty league. But please don't all of a sudden push down Drake London, push down Garrett Wilson, those wide receivers that are truly elite level prospects. But the guys that were in the same tier like Watson, Moore, and Dotson, that's when we react with those landing spots. But of course, thank you so much for being a part of the flock, supporting the channel. Really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe. And if you have not done so already, go get our Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide over there on flockfantasy.com. A ton of great information. And of course, all our rankings can be found over there as well. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.